Okay, welcome everybody. I see a couple people connecting and hopefully more people on the stream. My name is Steve Hughes. I'll be moderating this session and we're going to hear from the folks in a little bit, but this is the session Organizing in the 2020s, Challenges and Innovations at the International Level. We're going to do a round of hearing just some introductions from the speakers, but just to give you an idea of the format of this, we're very much hoping this to be a discussion. And as such, I actually asked the participants, the speakers today, to also think of a question they would like to ask one of their fellow participants. So we're going to do a round of questions, participant to begin with. And then we're going to open up the floor. I'll have some questions perhaps. And also, like I said, this is going to be a discussion. To get us started, let's just do a quick round of introductions. And I'm looking here at my screen and I see you, Valerie, next to me. Do you want to say a few minutes, who you are, where you're calling in from? I guess that's sort of a funny question for you, but like where you normally call in from, I guess. And what you do, and then you can pass it to one of your fellow panelists.
Yes, so I'm Valeria Alzaga, and I am actually from Mexico. So my homeland is Aztlán, Mexico. But I'm an international, let's say, labor organizer. So I've worked with many trade unions in several countries, especially in Northern Europe. And I'm actually calling from Australia, where I am right now for a few months. And I'm also an activist and a migrant rights organizer, and also a mother of 2 little kids. So that's me. And I guess I'll pass it over to Kate, who is to my left, always to my left. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Kate, originally from Kate Baird, originally from London. I've been living in Barcelona for 13 years, and for the last 6 years I've been involved in Barcelona en Común, doing different things at different times. I was doing the international work for a while. Now I'm focused more on communications, and during the last election campaign I was kind of coordinating with other people the election campaign. So yeah, looking forward to this.
You want to pass it to somebody, Kate?
Sorry, to Gabe.
Thanks, Kate. I'm Gabe Tobias from New York City, calling in from Brooklyn, New York, where it is a sweaty 93 degrees, which is, I don't know what that is in Celsius. Close to 40, maybe?
Yeah, it's hot. It's very hot.
It's the sweaty end of the thermometer.
Get up to close to 40.
Yeah. I'm currently the executive director of Our City, which was a project this past year to help progressives win in New York City elections, which we just had a few weeks ago. And we think we have the final results of, pretty much final. We'll find out soon enough. And I was also the co-founder of Movement School, which is a project here in the US to train young organizers who are getting into the electoral space. And also previously was a senior advisor at Justice Democrats project to elect progressive, mostly primary challengers to more conservative Democrats here in the US. And excited to be here and talk about all the things we have in common and the differences between all of our works. I guess I'll pass over to Maurice.
Hey everyone, my name is Maurice Mitchell. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently calling in from Long Island, balmy Long Island in New York. I'm the national director of the Working Families Party. I've been organizing since I was a young person. I started organizing as a youth student organizer here on Long Island. I eventually became a campus organizer at Howard University in DC, and then went back to Long Island and New York and spent a lot of time doing issue-based and constituency-based and organizational coalition organizing and electoral organizing in New York. And then in 2014, I embedded with the Organization for Black Struggle in St. Louis to support them and others on the ground in St. Louis and Ferguson during the uprising. And for around 4 years, helped to build the movement for Black Lives and catalyze it to become an international movement. And then when Trump got elected, I took the role as National Director of Working Families Party. I'm the second director of Working Families Party. And in that time, I've been working to transform the party to be in fighting shape in order to challenge white Christian identity in its politicized form through Trump and Trumpism, and create a multiracial working class alignment of folks that could engage in that work cycle after cycle. Happy to be here. And I will pass it to Sabrina.
Sabrina, there's something wrong with your audio. Or your Mickey Mouse, one of the two. It's very, very loud, very squeaky. Okay, we'll go on to somebody else. And just for the folks that aren't the panelists, I would love to hear who you are, and we have a small enough group that we can do that, but just a quick introduction of who you are, where you're calling in from. And so maybe we'll ask Paula, are you there? There's Paula. You're on mute, Paula.
After years of Zoom, I should know better than to be on mute. So I'm Paula. I'm from New York City. Normally, I'm out in California, and I've been a public interest lawyer for decades.
Great, thank you.
I just want to try. Hi.
We
Hello.
can hear you. Yep.
Yeah, it always happens. I don't know. I don't know if it's me or if you go on with someone else.
Go for it.
No, you're.
Okay, sorry. Well, as I was saying before, my name is Sabrina Angulo. I'm very pleased to be here. I am from Peru. I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, a militant, and an activist. I am a militant of Nuevo Peru, an organization, a political organization from my country. Right now, we are supporting the new elected president, Pedro Castillo, but we are struggling because the right parties don't want to accept the defeat. So they are trying to boycott and try to do a kind of coup d'etat. So we are just continue fighting against them and for the proclamation of the new president. And I've been an activist for Barcelona en Comú for years. I am here in Barcelona. Of course, I live here. I've been living here for 13 years, and I am very interested in ways of fighting against colonialism, patriarchy, and also ways to improve the way that we can accept each other as multicultural peoples, and very interested in geopolitics, of course. That's why I am here in this session. I want to find ways how we can be united internationally to fight against these bad ways of trying to oppress different people around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a small enough group. We're just doing quick introductions, and I'll just keep us going with it. Jonathan, do you want to quickly put you on the spot here?
Hello, I'm
Hi.
Jonathan. I've been an activist off and on. I work in the university. Last year we organized a thing called the Global Teach-In with about 30 locations in 20 countries. And we had David Graeber before he died involved and some other people. And we tried to link into the COVID crisis how to have systemic transformation that would be demilitarized, ecological, and democratic. We had some participants from Latin America and Spain in one unit, some Fridays for Future types, and some other older types. I do research on ecological transformation, economic democracy, and demilitarization, and green jobs. I wrote a book about how universities were linked to imperialism and militarism. That was published a long time ago. And I have various ideas. I'm working with some activists in Germany who want to create a kind of a space for exiles, immigrant exiles, to promote human rights, better ethnic integration, and also leverage the capacities that they have as exiles, because often immigrants are incorporated into these countries in Europe and the US, South Africa, and all over in a way where they don't have qualified jobs. And as I'm an academic, I tend to talk too much, so I better stop.
I'm gonna keep us going. Thank you. And then we're just rolling with this because we do have a small group. I see Fabio there, and AJ, I think, might just be lurking. I know who AJ is. I don't know if he wants to introduce himself, but Fabio, are you there? Okay, we'll just take that as a no for now. And then AJ, you wanted to say hi if you're there, or just listening in?
Here, but listening. Senior
Great.
College Manager with the Working Families Party.
Thank you. All right. So like I said, what we're going to do, the format for this is we're trying to have a discussion. I personally I've been sat in on a lot of panels over the years, and I personally don't like the format at all. And I particularly don't like the way in which it sort of encourages panelists to just sort of give their spiel, and then the next person give their spiel, and the next person. So we're trying to have this be a discussion. So the first thing we're going to do is allow for the panelists to ask each other some questions and get us started off on the right foot of approaching this as a process of mutual learning and sharing. So I believe the first person on the docket is Kate. You were going to ask a question to Maurice, I believe. So do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it will be easy for us to have a conversation because actually for the past few years, we as individuals and also our organizations have actually been having these conversations about organizing and teaching one another. So it feels really, really natural to me. And I think the great thing is we all have very similar goals and values, but very different strengths from, you know, the different contexts that we're in. And one of the things that I really kind of admire from the States and from working families in particular is like the capacity that you seem to have to identify and cultivate and build new leaders, you know, not just candidates, but all kinds of leaders within your organization and your movement. And so I would be really interested to hear like what principles and tools you use to do that, and also if the pandemic has affected that work, and if you have any kind of new ideas in that area.
Great question, and always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, Kate. Yeah, I feel like a deep personal and institutional and ideological kinship with the folks in Barcelona. So to answer your question, you know, I often talk about politics in the context of the United States being very entrepreneurial, right? And I think it fits the sort of culture of this country, right? There's this idea of rugged individualism. And so the two things that I think are very, very present in most folks in the political class is ambition and a healthy ego, right? A desire to see your name on stuff, right? And so we seek, and also it's very self-selecting, right? So a lot of the political class are not necessarily people who have service as the thing that is driving them, not necessarily people who are grounded in a very strong ideological anchor. So one of the things that we seek to do is develop a pipeline of a new generation of people who are willing to take these roles that is very, very different from that sort of format, right? And so we try to flip it, right? In the same way that a lot of elected officials wake up one way and decide, like, it's my time to shine. I'm gonna run for mayor. Let me find some consultants. Let me put together a plan. Let me then, through those consultants, develop my platform. Let me then, through that platform, put together my voter universe and my demographic universe and get to 50% plus one so that we could win. We try to do the reverse, where we focus on our ideological framework, what our platform is, and then based on that, what are the positions, what are the specific roles that we want to fill, and then how can we surface leaders who could be in a co-governance relationship with a base of people that are responsible for that. So it's a different way of thinking about it. And one of the things that I think I'm really proud of is that we seek to find people who are uncommon, who aren't in the center generally of leadership because of their identity, so that we recruit a lot of LGBTQ folks, we recruit a lot of women and people of color, and we're identifying different types of leadership values. So being part of organization matters, having experience organizing matters, having a connection to and having experience being accountable to other people, that really matters, right? Because we want those folks to continue during governance to have that accountability relationship. And the process that we go about doing that is that we have internal governance. So we have state and national committees of activists, union members, grassroots organizers who debate and vet our folks, and our endorsements come with their seal of approval. And there's a lot more I can say about that, but it's one of the prouder aspects of our work is this pipeline work of surfacing leaders and then preparing them to do this work. The pandemic, I think, made the work more urgent, and I think it had us use a lot of, or lean on a lot of digital tools, because we couldn't be in person and we couldn't do the door knocking and that type of work. And I think, now that we're now inching out of that, we're going to continue to have those strengths, but then be able to regain our access to people at the doors. The other thing I think is that the pandemic ideologically, I think, made the case for all of our values and all of our politics. So we were able to have a lot of interesting and really deep conversations with everyday working people, where the contradictions of neoliberal capitalism were laid clear for people. So we were able to have some very deep and high level conversations about the world they want to live in, because the world that they did live in had collapsed, and all the infrastructure and all the systems that we had been told were supposed to support all of us that were in free fall. And so folks who weren't necessarily ideological could engage in these questions about what type of structures, what type of world we want to build, and what type of new vehicles and new politics would allow us to do that. So Steve, should I ask a question, or?
I would love to come back quickly if I can.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting,
Yes,
because the
please.
challenge you have with, kind of individualism and, egoism is the opposite to the one we have, because we come from a culture that's like popular assemblies, and people don't want to see their name on anything. And the problem that we have is that we collectivize all of our successes. I mean, anytime one of our activists could have been really like leading a project, but in the moment they have to explain it or present it or whatever, we did this all of us together. And it's really healthy in some ways, because it is a reflection of our values, but sometimes you need someone who wants their face on a billboard, right? So no, it's interesting. We're kind of trying to get to the same middle point from two opposite extremes.
That's so true. Yeah, you want to get people who don't want their face on the billboard to agree to submit to getting their face on the billboard. Right? Like, and it's the people who are the first takers, those are the folks that we want to be like, no, not you. Let's see if there's other folks in the class. Right? That is the tension. Yeah.
you'll, for those of you who haven't spoken yet, maneuver. Great. So let's just keep this going. And yes, Maurice, you are up next to ask a question.
Okay.
to Valerie.
I'd like, yeah. So Valerie, my question, and I don't know how much you're familiar with working families, but in our DNA is the idea that labor and organizing working people and labor institutions are essential to working people gaining governing power and being able to be in control of their lives. And so I guess my question for you is, what are your observations about union organizing around the globe, and what, if any, lessons can organized labor in the US take from recent wins or losses in other countries as we try to build power and deal with sort of the challenges that we're experiencing in the context of our country?
Yeah. So, globally is a very big word, right? So I come from the Justice for Janitors campaign. So I was an organizer knocking on doors, migrant worker doors in Denver, and then in California, and then in Connecticut. So I come from really kind of community / labor organizing, and that was my DNA, right? And then the Zapatista movement transversed me as well. And through J4J, I ended up doing global work because we were really going after multinational corporations that were actually in Europe. So we were coming over to Europe to be like, can you help us, actually win against these kind of huge multinational employers? And I would argue that, then the Europeans were like, well, we can help you, but we're really badly organized too. We forgot, So I've been like, a Mexican woman coming back to the old continent to talk to British people how to build unions. It's a fucking weird thing. And it is weird because in some ways we go around, we understand, how neoliberalism works and the precarization of labor, and who's at the front line is usually genderized and racialized labor force, which is women and migrants. And so that's my background, and that's where I come from. And the interesting thing about working abroad is that we both, bring the know-how. And my job has been to open source that, which is interesting because in teaching, I'm learning, yeah, and in teaching humbly, I'm learning because we do know a lot, and I'm a bargaining for the common good kind of like strategist as well, and a lot of the things we're mixing have been of major importance. But I would argue that what we have to learn there and here is that you can fake this shit. You gotta organize, and you gotta put the resources and time and focus to develop those deep benches and to develop campaigning in which people can be trained, right? Because we can't do it only, technically when you're actually out doing the work, because then you don't have the ideological depth. And you cannot only, basically you have to do both. You have to do the technical side, the skilling side, the campaigning side, the strategy side, the know-how side, as well as the ideological grounding. And in some ways, what I'm experiencing in a lot of the European unions that I've been with, the Germans, for example, spend a lot of time in ideological development. I mean, their training programs and the way in which they think about developing even workers moving forward, right? It's the most developed. I mean, they have colleges and campuses, and I'm like, Jesus, if we could only wish that we had so much investment on our development. On the other hand, I think all just like I got some of our parties, we have been ossified, and we forget where we come from, and we forget to organize, and we become very professionalized. So I would say that we have very similar problems, Maurice. But having said that, what I would argue is that everywhere I go, what is important about the labor movement is that we're in a fight to win, and we know how to win, and we know the strategies, and we also spend a lot of time understanding our enemies or our opposition. And I would argue that we do well. And one of the things that I've seen, for example, in my work in the UK lately, is that as we were trying to do social care, which would be nursing homes and home care, A lot of our work was actually, once we had a lot of unions in the UK actually are pipelines for MPs and city councils. So the unions themselves are producing a lot of candidates, right? And then they move into the electoral world, and then they forget where they come from. Or a lot of our people that we support in the parties get into power, and then they forget that the point of being there is to help the goddamn people that put them there. So a lot of what we've been trying to do is really kick their ass. I mean, and say, look, yes, you got elected, we helped you get elected, but we're gonna continue pushing on you, and not only directly on you, but create the fight on the streets and in the lobbies and in multi-directional ways, so we create the environment for you to be able to give us what we want. So we also look at the political world, right, as a campaigning space. So very recently, for example, we partnered up with Momentum in Stockport in the UK to really kind of line up and push the Labour Party people themselves, usually moderates that don't do the follow-up, and I would argue we do that well. We continue to put the pressure on, which I think in the US, that should happen right now. We can't just go to bed because we elected somebody. We need to continue campaigning around our issues in order to put the necessary pressure for those very people we elected, and the people blocking those people we elected, that they're on notice, right? So what we've been doing really is to kind of really become better organizers and better campaigners, better at striking, better at mobilizing. And that means developing people to align fights that are both industrial in the sense of labor with other fights, be housing or be political elections, in which we really need to align all these forces in order for us to win way more than we could if we were alone. I would argue then that a lot of our efforts are also to be at the cutting edge of organizing. So just like you, we had to do digital, organizing, offline to online, et cetera. We had to kind of really get a whole bunch of people that were very uneasy with technology to understand it's just another tool, and also to understand actually data, AI, algorithmic management. Or the digital world is not only because we have to connect with each other, but also we have to fight that terrain. One of the things that we've been really thinking about is precisely how, as a labor movement, we need to fight for our data rights, yeah? And as workers in particular, owning that data or having access and transparency issues with our data. And we are kind of engaged also in those kind of cutting edge spaces that is transforming our obviously our workplaces, but also the way in which data should be a common good. And so I would argue that interestingly enough, because we are in all these spaces of contestation against capital, against neoliberalism, against everything that keeps us out, we're constantly at the edge of the fight. Yeah. What I would argue is that a lot of that fighting skills we need to transfer also to the political, because it's not just in the elections that we win, it is in the environment we create to make those changes. So I would say that those are kind of some of the thinking that I've been, I have like tons and tons of things to add, but I guess I could leave it for the next round. But those are some of the things that I would say we have a lot to teach, but we also have to learn a lot. And unions, just like every other organization, we're at different levels of awakening, fighting, and and so on. One thing that is very, very revolutionary, I would argue, and has been something amazing that has come out of the US is our impetus to really kind of implement and include racial capitalism, views within the labor movement. So we've been doing a lot of that work as well. In the UK, trying to really kind of integrate these pieces, and some of those things we learned from you. So I just want to say thank you, because it's really having an impact in the way we as trade unions are centering race, gender, and class, obviously, and other rights, right? LGBTQ, also like other kinds of minority rights, very centrally, not only in the ideological sense, but in what we bargained for, right? Because we need to change the very makeup of the industrial, but also the very makeup of our own unions to democratize the workplace as well as our own institutions and organizations. Yeah, so that's me. And yeah, any follow-up I would be happy to elaborate on.
That was very comprehensive, and it was great to hear that there's like a dynamic sort of sharing of information, you know, going back and forth. Like it's not one way or two ways, it's multiple ways, and that's really, really great to hear.
Yeah, good. Is it my turn to ask?
It's your turn to ask.
Yay. So, I mean, obviously, one of the very big inspirations in my life, and an honor to have participated in some work with Barcelona en Común, has been the municipalismo movement, and the fact that it is at the local, very ultra local level that we can build power and win, and really build a movement of change. And obviously, Barcelona en Común and their municipalismo has really been an amazing kind of like development, right? Not only winning, but really changing the politics of a city. And so I wanted to both ask Kate to share a little bit about the municipalismo, kind of work that Barcelona en Común has done, but also how are you integrating your organizing and your participatory politics, both as you talk, the assembly, the barrios, the leadership in the ground, in the very makeup of what you change and how you're actually using municipalismo to achieve the politics we all want. So yeah, I'm very excited to hear about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, probably you've kind of touched on it, but it's probably worth kind of recalling what we mean when we talk about municipalism. Firstly, it's the idea of doing politics at a local scale. And then the thing that makes it different from just, local socialism or local progressive politics is, as you said, it's the idea of changing the way we do politics and moving beyond just winning elections and implementing a progressive platform, but actually empowering people and communities and involving people actively in governance and in decision making. So, I mean, given that, it's kind of easy to see how that context is actually very favorable to organizing, because it's that local scale that allows us to physically bring people together in a common project. It's the local scale that allows us to directly talk to our neighbors about the city and get them involved, whether that be door to door or in assemblies in the squares of the city or on the streets. And it actually means that there can be a very direct line between those conversations that we're having with people and our platform, and even, the work we're doing in government. And there's another thing that I think is really important, which is what we call confluence, which is this idea of building an alliance locally that is more than the sum of its parts. You know that Barcelona en Común is a kind of new organization that includes both people who come from social movements in the city, people who come from previous Green and Left parties, Podemos, and people who had never been involved in any kind of organizing before. And although that sounds, it's easy to say, but the actual construction of those of that unity and of that alliance with many different political cultures and histories and traditions and priorities, without it all falling apart. I mean, we know the left is famously can't keep it together, and we have, and I think that is very largely to do with activists organizing side by side in their neighborhoods, doing the work, because you can have an ideological disagreement or strategic difference or whatever, but if you have been up, into the night, knocking doors or hanging up, election posters in your neighborhood, side by side, like that is what really builds kind of personal bonds that are the glue that holds the confluence together. So yeah, and I think this idea of the human scale and the importance of kind of physical togetherness, I think the pandemic has just, you know, we already had this hypothesis, but not being able to do that has just kind of confirmed, you know, having the experiment, you know, of not being able to do it has really proved that that is where our strength lies. And in terms of, well, just, I don't want to go on and on because I could talk about this for forever, but in terms of the participation, I think there's two kind of things that we're trying to do in parallel. And one is kind of to design organizing tools and activities that allow everyone to get involved, like kind of easy, fun, and community tools and activities that create a sense of community and belonging, and door-to-door, phone banks, all of these kind of things that just allow anyone to get involved and do politics. But the other thing I think that's really important to do in parallel to that is to allow everyone to become an organizer according to their unique skills and interests. So everyone can do door-to-door, but also, like, if you're in, I don't know, if you're an illustrator, if you're in construction, if you drive vehicles, if you're a poet, if you're a singer, like, we want, like, all of those people with all of those skills to be able to design their own organizing strategies. And for me, a really good example of that is our rebel choir, our Cor Rebel, which we set up a few years ago, where we have like 50 activists who sing, and that is their political activity. And it's hugely valuable and in so many ways as a communication tool, as an organizing tool. But those are people who, you know, they like to sing. So let's, like, find a way for them to make that their political activity. And I think the local level is what allows that kind of creativity to flourish and that kind of experimentation to happen. So so yeah, the two for us really go hand in hand, the municipalism and the organizing. And I'm actually in awe of anyone who's organizing at larger scales, at regional or state or national level, because I can't even imagine, like, I can't even imagine how many challenges that throws up. Yeah, is it my turn to ask the question now, or shall I throw it back to Valerie? Or
Valerie, if you have any follow-up question or reflections based on what you...
No, I mean, I think what I've seen from afar is also some of the desires of and needs of the local really end up changing the way in which, you know, at least, you know, the mayor's program and your program as a party really translates into concrete wins, which I think is a very important piece, because as we all campaign, we can win an election, but if that doesn't change the reality of the people, it becomes difficult to keep people active. And I do think that you've done that well. I mean, from your dentistry to really creating a municipal owned energy company to really regulating Airbnb. I mean, the amount of city kind of work that you've done in partnership with other parties, but also like as a way of ending up giving back to the very base that you have, I think is the point of what I think is important, you know, as a movement. If we don't win and if we don't see a concrete outcome, it's very hard to keep that momentum and that growth and that scale. And I think that's part of the what I think is positive. I also know that your challenges is like, how do we get more people involved and more parts, you know, be migrants, be different parts of the city to have their own role, to have their own space. And those challenges are important. I mean, it's a good quality problem to have a very dynamic locality, but yeah, so
you're right. I did forget to say that, but there's nothing more motivating than winning stuff, whether that be winning the election or actually seeing the city around you transformed because of your organizing work. And again, like, it all feeds in together. The local scale that allows us to build an alliance that is capable of overcoming, the economic and media opposition, talking to neighbors, winning the election, changing the city, that brings more people in. It's like a virtuous circle.
Great. Kate, do you want to keep us rolling through this first round?
I think Gabe has to get in, doesn't he?
I think you're asking Gabe.
Oh, I'm asking Gabe. Okay. Sorry, I haven't prepared a question for Gabe. Well, maybe we could talk about what Valerie was mentioning about an anti-racist kind of multiracial perspective to organizing, because that's a big challenge for us here in Barcelona, and I'm sure in many other European cities, and I think in the States you're probably a few steps ahead of us on that.
Maybe some steps ahead and some steps behind at the same time. I think that it's been, I think Maurice probably is much better to answer this, but I'll throw in some things, and Maurice, feel free to join in as well. Like, the last year of politics here has been this extremely chaotic melting of both the, what we now see as the end of the Trump presidency, but a year ago that wasn't for sure, with the protest that came up after the murder of George Floyd, which was a year and a month and a half ago. And so there were so many things built and kind of baked in together that I think that in a lot of ways our movements were perfectly set up to make this argument, saying, look, these are actually the same fight. These are not different fights. The fight against Trump is the fight against racism. This is not like we have to make trade-offs. And that was the argument made a lot of times against the left and against progressives, was that, in order to defeat this, scourge of Trumpism, we have to stop talking about race. We heard that over and over and over again, whether it was the policing conversations, whether it was just in general about race and racism. It was this message that was kind of put down to say, hey, like, stop making so much trouble. What you should do is just focus on this one individual person. He is the biggest problem. And so everything should be about defeating him. And so you see this from elements of the Democratic Party, you see this from elements of the Republican Party who were against him. That was the kind of thing, you should, don't go in the streets, don't protest. This was like, I can't remember how many times this came up in the presidential election sort of last summer, of like, people telling Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, don't, you should tell these activists to go away, go home, stop like getting on the streets, stop getting into, mixing things up, that has to be a separate fight. And our message, and I think that was, we were successful in a lot of ways, and I think there's still a lot of work to do, is saying, no, these are the same fights. Trump is not an individual phenomenon that grew up out of just a random pot of American politics. He's the product of racialized capitalism that was intended to keep Black and brown communities down, immigrant communities down, LGBTQ communities down. There's no accident there, right? That he is, yes, an individual person, but there's no accident in the way that came about. And so our argument coming back is saying that, no, actually, we have to have this complex fight. We can't just say this is about this one person. And so because he lost the election last November, now everything is solved, right? That everything is better, and we can like move on with our lives. That first of all, of course, the movement that he began, sort of, Trumpism as a phenomenon, even if he never runs for office again, is very much alive and very much threatening the lives of our brothers and sisters across the country. And also that, when we think about, the fight around policing, this idea that, there is, I don't know, this is maybe a little too theoretical, but it rings true to me in a lot of different circumstances, this sort of big lie behind so much of what limits our political power is this idea that is being told, particularly to working class people, that stability, your ability to get your kids educated and that your kids are safe and that you have a job and all these things is tied to not challenging powerful people, powerful organizations. That you can't say, oh, the police is bad because that means your community will get less safe. You can't say this massive, Amazon is bad because that means you won't get a job there, you'll lose your job there. You can't say that these sort of like political leaders are bad because that challenge of them means instability, means that things will be chaotic and tumultuous, and that you'll lose the things you have. And this argument is made so often, particularly people who have so little, right? I don't think that rich people care about that argument. Their interest is, okay, well, this person is someone who will keep my taxes low. This person is someone who I may have, gone to a nice Ivy League school with. This person is someone who, seems nice. That they're not worried about losing things, but people in working classes are. They're like, well, I'm in a precarious situation. This is exactly what you're talking about, Valerie, with sort of organizing among janitors, among people who are really, constantly concerned they might lose their apartment, they might lose their house. Their kids might not be able to get educated well because they're in a community which has bad schools, because under-resourced. And so that argument is made again and again. I think that it's something that we've, I would hand this back to Maurice too, because I think Working Families Party has done such amazing work in this area of like, how do we make that argument cogent and real to people at a local level, especially because that's where people experience it, but also national too, right? Because we live in a country where our national politics has been so destructive to life at the local level. We have to be involved there as well. But yeah, I don't know, Maurice, if you got your thoughts on this big, wide-ranging mess of this last year.
Yeah, I mean, humbly, I think we approached it. We approached that mess with a lot of humility, right? And we definitely recognize that in a moment where we had an election that was approaching us, that most people understood was of existential consequence to whatever it is the American project is, right? And it also was happening during this global pandemic. And we had this reckoning with the history of white supremacy, slavery, colonialism, and the current conditions of people of color, specifically Black folks in this country, that wasn't by chance, right? That all these things were happening, and that this moment of intersecting crises, although very, very challenging and very traumatic for people, presented some opportunities for us to organize. And so we did a lot of experiments. Because these were novel conditions, right? Nobody had any analog historically or any experience in their lived experience where they could say, oh, this is what we did during that other global pandemic where, we had the largest uprising in our history, And I think for us, we thought it was really important to kind of cut through things. And in a moment where so many people, like in the millions, people who weren't necessarily politicized, were dealing with food lines and massive unemployment and witnessing police brutality, either indirectly or directly, like this was an opportunity to have real talk about people's lived experience and figure out how can we politicize and electoralize that. And then for our candidates, how can we give them the tools so that they could feel confident operating here and push, we had a movement that was articulating a very clear demand to defund the police. And for candidates, they're trying to figure out how do they sit in that, right? And, this was a moment for we had some candidates that, like Jamal Bowman, won in a district that was half suburban, half urban, included a lot of low income and working class Black Latino folks, but also middle income white folks in Westchester. He openly supported the movement and he won against an incumbent, right? So we have moments where people really leaned into the moment and into the movement and spoke and the other thing is that Jamal is a great, I think, communicator because he speaks very, very clearly and very, very plainly and cuts through a lot of this stuff in a way that everybody in his district, from the folks in Westchester to the folks in the Bronx, get and understand in a very real way. So I think we have examples of that, of people being able to make it about people's lived experience at a time where it was really clear that things weren't working out and a lot of stuff was happening. And you don't have to be a close observer to understand that all of these things couldn't be happening all at once by chance, right? And then, so it creates this opportunity to make meaning. And I think our political leaders, at their best, they help people make meaning of the conditions that they're in, right? And so I think we saw some of that. And it, I want to be really transparent and humble. Like all projects are uneven. So I think we had a lot of attempts, both in New York in the city council and all the way up of trying to take this on, and varying degrees of success. But I think what we've learned is we have to make it plain, right? We have to figure out, I think sometimes ideology is used as a way to demonstrate how righteous and smart we are, versus used as a way to assess our conditions and be able to point to our North Star. But ultimately, our end goal needs to be organizing working people, right? And so using terminology that is maybe ideal for the academy, right, doesn't necessarily help people make meaning of the experience, especially when we were experiencing a very psychologically and emotionally dislocating, global event, right? And so I think where we were able to distill that into language that was understandable and colloquial and culturally accessible to working people, we were able to move folks. And I think we actually saw how social movements, which have a different set of demands, could align with politics. We actually saw that happening. We saw the Movement for Black Lives and some of the activists and some of the grassroots folks electoralize the work that was taking place. And also we saw folks in electoral politics be moved by the social movement to take stances that they wouldn't have taken. And one of the things I say is in these moments, we see liberals become radicalized, right? Which is really interesting. And also radicals become electoralized, right? And I think that actually is a good thing, because these tools, elections and using elections to gain governing power, is simply a tool. There's nothing inherently ideological about that as a tool. It's what is the political program of the person using that tool? And so I think it was very useful for political radicals and those in social movements to begin to pick up those tools. And then it was great to see elected officials that generally don't want to push the boundaries to actually gain some success championing some of the causes on the street.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, should I ask?
Yes, I was just going to say, it's your turn to ask.
Valerie, this is kind of piggybacking on Maurice's question. Was thinking just from looking back, looking forward question, thinking about worker organizing in the past, not the only way, but the traditional big political way has been through these, large scale unions, industrial unions, public sector unions, either making their own political parties or having political parties that are very, very close to them and saying, okay, these are the people who will be doing the work for us. We elect these people, we are, funding them and so forth. And so I'm interested in looking, at the last decade, 2 decades, the kind of economic changes in the world that have created these new needs for worker organizing, the gig economy, the globalization, displacing of workers across the world, just general movement of workers away from industrial, this is the job I'll have for my entire life, to retail work where I go here for 2 years, here for 2 years, and so on and so forth. I think a lot has been talked about the challenges that poses for worker organizing, but I'm interested in your thoughts on how these new kind of economic forms what opportunities that creates for worker political power and how you've seen that happen in the world, and maybe some examples of places where like not as well known, lesser known examples of where that organizing among new economic sectors has really resulted in big political gains.
So I'm very close friends with folks that are actually doing gig economy organizing, and there's other friends that are trying to organize in Amazon, and all these kind of new capitalistic kind of extreme forms of exploitation and value extraction, right? I think it's been very challenging. I'm not going to lie to you. Organizing folks that are not in one workplace, that are constantly, leaving the workplace, is very difficult. While at the same time, that disaggregation has also been an advantage. An example is home care workers, right? Especially, I would argue, in kind of more developed economies where capital is so aggressive and anti-union. The big problem is how to form a union and win when you have like such an extreme violent attack, and at the electoral level, you feel it, right? When the right wing is lying and is misinforming and is getting people scared. Well, imagine that happening every time you organize in a workplace with very narrow field of winning. And so we end up having to organize in a lot of fear or around fear, and we have to overcome it. And the weird about the decentralization of power is that the boss then is not with you all the time. So that freedom and that autonomy also allows for workers to get organized, in different places, be in the virtual, be also kind of like, in networks, and going back to then, home visiting and things like that. So, that decentralization has some advantages, but at the same time, it's very hard to aggregate and it's very hard to win. So what we've been needing to do is really think about our opposition in very different ways, because I think, again, we tend to think about organizing only like the workers, but we need to organize a whole set of relationships and a whole set of unequal power dynamics. And so for us also, I would argue that we may do a lot of military minority fights to get the right to going back into a workplace without repression. So there are different ways. But what I think is very important, and I think it goes back to the politics as well, is to understand where that money is coming from. We tend to fight the boss as if the boss has the power. But if you look and follow the money, what ends up happening, especially in outsourced companies, is that they're fighting with each other, right? But they're benefiting another client. And that client might be owned by an equity fund. And that equity fund might be actually, very well organized in, a chamber of commerce or in their own lobbying capacity. And so we end up fighting the wrong target. And for us, what's important is to really understand then not only how to win the worker side, but really how to engage in a space that we really go after the protagonist or the perpetrators of these particular let's say labor relations, and how to regulate that. So one example of that is that we've been really thinking about, as public sector unions, for example, that have then outsourced the work because we are, cities are going broke, apropos of austerity, apropos of tax evasion, apropos of, all types of ways of defunding the common good, is how to go back into tax evasion as a campaigning process, right? To try to get money back into that city. So we are fighting fights in which the income can actually be won somewhere, right? Because the problem is that we keep fighting cities that are broke. We keep fighting employers that are, in a heavy competition. So I think the analysis of really understanding how we have to open the tax revenue again, be raising the corporate tax, which is a very big conversation in the US, but also go after the tax evasion and all this deregulation. So we need to fight both at the worker, at the employer level. But if that reality is not actually understood upwards, we will never have a distribution of what we really need in order to fund very much the public services and the things that we've outsourced, because we are trying to save money on the back of austerity, on the back of neoliberalism. So for me, what's important, I would argue, is that it's not only the dynamic of the workplace, which I think, you know, we're experimenting, but if we don't end up regulating labor rights or making accountable companies that are union busting in such a degree, like Amazon and so on, it's like you can't really win where, you know, they have the power over workers. They, you know, they spend time with them. They can put the narrative every day, and the fear tactics. That's one level of fight that we need to understand is to be regulated as well, both by law, but also by the community around it making responsible, you know, this kind of tactics. So for us, all those levels of campaigning have been really, really important to understand. I mean, in Australia, where I am right now, there has been a tax justice, SICTAR, with our friend Jason Ward, who has been really working with, labor confederations, nurses unions, and also public sector unions in Europe to really try to go after tax evasion. Yeah, he and the collaboration he did with ITF won a huge settlement against Chevron of billions of bucks. Yeah, that went back into the tax revenue. And again, a lot of public sector unions right now are going after, again, like big oil companies and companies that don't pay taxes, in order to make sure that, for example, all the public sectors have put an OECD complaint around the fact that the Netherlands is one of those gates in which all this leakage happens. Yeah. Why am I mentioning this? Is because I think it has to do a lot with how we win. We can't just look at right here. We have to be good campaigners and look at every level of regulation and fight we can actually, basically engage in. And for me, that's what's interesting about all this new economy stuff, is that we need to understand it as a whole system of power dynamics, and the workplace is just one. Multi-directional pressure and the way in which we really then align in a bargaining for a common good strategy with others that are affected and are actually fighting for that revenue, be the schools, be the hospitals, be the healthcare, be every public service that we're fighting for, then that is what the alignment that I think has been really helping win. And at the same time, I would argue using community support and other organizations to really beef up that support for workers that are not vulnerable in a victim way, but vulnerable just because it's difficult to win. Yeah. At the same time as we're getting better at organizing, be digital as well as offline. But it just also takes what Morris was talking about. It's like being able to have good messaging and having the foundations of good organizing, which a lot of us actually need to kind of keep producing and keep teaching, because we have a lot of new people coming in that need just to be trained, mentored, and supported in these fights. And I think that's where we need to spend most of our money, resources, and focus, is building that infrastructure so we can win again.
Gabe, unless you have a follow-up to that, maybe I can pick up on that and keep us moving to the. I'm of two minds a little bit on how I would love this conversation to proceed in a way, because the title of this session is it speaks to both innovations in organizing and at the international level. And so I'm going to, I guess, put two questions on the table for all of you, and you can choose to speak to one of them or both of them or however you see fit. But one of them is going more towards the international level and towards an international practice that we might share or look at as saying that's ours, the way we do it as an international movement. And the other question is more about drilling down into the nuts and bolts of organizing. So first, question number one is, Maurice, you put on the table that we are living in a time of intersecting crises, which is absolutely, I think everybody is seeing that in real terms, in real time. And part of what has defined this moment politically is the breakdown of traditional political parties. The center left, center right has sort of broken down. And also, you know, Valerie, I think it's safe to say that one other thing that's defined this is the breakdown of like the organized working class in many ways. And we're trying to figure out how to reconstitute it in this new emerging economy. But like the traditional economy is certainly like pulling apart at the seams at this moment. So one question that speaks to sort of this big picture is, how do you as panelists locate your work in that context of this crisis and sort of the breakdown of the way things used to be? The other question I'll put on the table, and then I'll shut up, is I know a lot of organizers, when they think about their practice, one of the ways they measure it is how many leaders they develop or how many people like they mentor as leaders in the movement. And I think there's a lot of like tension and struggle over this term of like leadership, what it means to build a leaderful movement. So my question that really drills down into the like nuts and bolts of organizing are, what are the challenges that you were wrestling with when you create or try to create leaderful movements and leaderful organizations? So 2 questions, pick or choose, try to synthesize them together if you want. It's up to you. The floor is open.
Well, I could speak to the leadership. I already touched on it a bit earlier, talking about this very collective culture we have in Barcelona in Común, which is it's one of our strengths, and it's something that, you know, other organizations and movements in the world come to us to learn about. But it does create challenges in terms of creating leaders. On the one hand, we do have an organizational structure that creates good conditions for building a leaderful movement, because we have a very decentralized organization with you know, assemblies in the different neighborhoods and a lot of autonomy for the different groups in our organization to experiment, to lead projects, to campaign. And so I think the structure is there, but there's a cultural challenge, which is also to do with our kind of our ideological roots, which comes from a kind of, you know, wanting a more democratic, horizontal way of doing politics, a very kind of legitimately critical attitude to traditional forms of authority and political leadership. And so it's very easy to like throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know if people, if that's a translatable phrase, but and kind of say, okay, because we don't like how political leaders have behaved in the past, we like leadership itself is a bad thing, and that we need a kind of just anonymous collective movement. But anonymous collective movements are great for some things, and then for doing other things, they're not so great. So I think that one of the big challenges we have is to find a kind of healthy new idea of leadership that we can feel comfortable with, and then encourage people to step into those roles and not feel like they're somehow betraying, you know, their values or who we are or the kind of politics we want to do. So yeah, any help welcome with that. If anyone has any tips.
I mean, the one thing I'll say about this challenge of building a leader from, I mean, I look at it like, I just think it's dialectical, right? So when I think of, you know, I could speak from the Black radical tradition and the civil rights movement, and there was a culture of a movement that always was leaderful as a strategy, elevating an individual that typically was a straight man, right? In order to be the avatar for the movement, right? So there's so many leaders, and one of the strategies, one of the communication strategies was elevating the avatar, right? There were limitations to that, right? That I think folks experienced. Both, it was easy to decapitate the movement. It was easy to discredit the movement by discrediting that individual, even if that individual was not operating just based on their personal desires, that there was more of a collective decision-making involved. And so, when I think about Occupy and some of the experiments of creating very, very flat, decentralized movements, I think we saw like nothing was truly leaderless, but an attempt to create the most flat movement possible. One of the things I think we tried to do in the movement for Black Lives was we certainly wanted to have a movement that was very, very flat and dynamic and decentralized, but we also recognized the value of leadership. And so we attempted to be leaderful. We attempted to say that leadership mattered, but it shouldn't be in the body of one individual. Many, many people can be leaders at the same time. And now I feel like we're in this interesting crisis where we're trying to integrate that concept with building organization. And there's a struggle, I think, that's happening around how does organization and institution building and decentralized movements that operate a little bit differently than institutions, how do they mesh? And how does leadership within an institution versus leadership in a movement differ, or how are they the same? And I think these are kind of live questions that we're wrestling with. And my answer is that I think that depending on the institutional form, leadership might look differently, and that's okay. And we shouldn't have a one size fits all sort of understanding of how leadership needs to happen. And that, in a street protest, the leadership that is necessary might be different than in a party formation. And I think we should have an appreciation of a diversity of leadership types.
Yeah, I think the other thing that is a challenge is when you have these people who take on, they take that step forward, either standing for office or taking on responsibilities, is often the first question. And it happens a lot in these kind of forums as well, is how do we hold them to account? Yeah. It's like the first question is, well, obviously they're going to betray us. Obviously we can't trust them anymore. Obviously they're now the enemy, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, we know that there's a risk of co-optation. We know that, people can become institutionalized if they're in power for years and years and years. We know that people can, lose their path. But that doesn't happen in a few months. It's the same person. They're just in a different situation. So our job, like Valerie was saying before, is to create the conditions that help them to succeed, put pressure when necessary, but also support them, because, they're already going to have enough real adversaries, right, from other coming from elsewhere. And I think often what we tend to do is we tend to find someone, put them into a position of leadership or visibility, and then okay, good luck. And or even then feel like our job is to be just always pushing and criticizing. And I think that can be really tough for the people who take on, those positions, to suddenly, take on that position, and then suddenly their comrades supposedly are not there to support them anymore, yeah.
Gabe, I actually wanted to ask you about your school, because you didn't talk a lot about it, but this would be a perfect time to ask you and learn from you. Yeah. How is this school functioning? How are you building it? Yeah, and developing it?
I was thinking about this, the movement school work in the context of this question that Steve asked. And I mean, there's a lot of things I like about the way we've, methodologically formed it. It's very practice-based, and, really about how do we connect the ethos and values of activist and issue organizing world with the kind of practical day-to-day work of a political campaign. But I think the thing which, and this was a little bit as Maurice was talking, I was thinking about this. One of the things that we did kind of accidentally was that, it's meant to be like there's a small cohort. It's not like we have programs which are like hundreds of people watching something at the same time, but there's a small cohort, campaign fellows program that was the first thing we did. And it's 40 to 50 people for 10 weeks. So a very intensive 10 weeks with a small group of people. That was part of the idea, that they would get to know each other as well. But we had this problem in the beginning because the idea was it should be people who don't have a lot of experience working political campaigns, maybe have done some organizing work. Some of them were like high school students. Some of them are in their 60s and 70s and have been doing organizing, sort of like as a hobby, but now want to get more serious. There's a wide range of people. We had an idea about what the profile we wanted to be, like mostly people of color, mostly women, or not, at least not men. Mostly people who had working class backgrounds. So it was like 70, 80% of those areas up. But we didn't really know how to decide. There's a lot of people like that. So it was, okay, well, what do we do? Like, how are we picking these people? And I think the first cohort, we just were sort of guessing. But like, we had this, we had a panel of people who review all the applicants and go through and say like, okay, this person seems interesting. They don't have a lot of experience, but they seem interesting. They did this one thing, or they said this one thing in their application. Let's accept them. And it was sort of random. We honestly just had very little time to make these decisions. So we weren't sitting there for like years thinking about it. And it was amazing. And in ways that we just couldn't predict, like, people who came in with very, very different, varied experiences, different parts of the country, and didn't really necessarily come in with like a resume that said, okay, yes, the person can be, a campaign manager on someone's congressional campaign or something. And they could. And so I think that was something of a lesson that we drew from that I think is just important, thinking about the kind of leaderful movement, is that there really isn't one profile that says this person can or can't be a leader. I think Maurice is right. Like, there's different leaders for different spaces, and they make sense different places. Some people are very comfortable jumping up with a megaphone and leading a protest, and they wouldn't. Other people would literally rather die than ever do that. That's just not a thing they're comfortable doing. But the kind of leaders that we want to have could really be anywhere. I think that's such a powerful way to challenge the established sort of very elite-driven politics that exists, to say, look, you're actually not that special. Like, maybe you've managed like a presidential campaign, like, great, I'm glad you did that. I hope that working for a good person, but you're not that special. Like, there's someone, I've met this person who's, 19 years old, who could do the same thing. Maybe they need like a year or two of like getting used to it and feeling confident for themselves, but they could do the same thing. They have the same skills you do. They're probably smarter than you are in lots of ways. They're, much more tech savvy than you are. Like, they could do these same things. I think that that ethos was very powerful, at least for movement school and us, and saying, yeah, like, these people can do these things. Like, yeah, there are some technical things to teach, if you're talking about how do you, build a voter universe, and, for the US, we don't have privacy laws. And so we do that. Those things are important, but it's really like, if someone's able to do that learning, and someone is that bought into the project and is committed to it, they can do it. The leaders are everywhere, and it's kind of like, it should scare the people who have power, and they've built it around the fact that they are these like special snowflake unicorns that no one else could possibly do their job. But yeah, actually a lot of people do your job. Just because you went to Yale and you like have some friends who, run consulting firms, doesn't mean that you are actually that unique. So that's one little bit that I've taken from that.
Yeah, no, I think the labor movement in that sense is precisely, we tend to very much be thorough about identifying organic leadership, right? And really understanding that organic leaders exist in the barrios, exist in the workplace, exist in networks. And those folks might not be the ones with the megaphones, but they are the ones with a huge amount of power to move people and to talk, and so you're right. I think like leadership teams is the best space, because you're going to have, the deep, long relationship holders, plus maybe those folks that are maybe okay with speaking publicly, but it is developing each other's strengths and learning edges that allows them to really end up with the best kind of deep benches or cohorts. Yeah. And I do think in that sense, put in the resources and the time and a program to do that. And again, I agree with you, Gabe. It's not like hundreds of them, I wish. But it is kind of that next generation, or, you know, list building, precisely who is doing interesting work, who's respected, who has interesting ideas, and really be very deliberate about it. And also then deliberate at a program that has focus, because we tend to ride 3 horses with one ass and then wonder why shit is not working, you know? And it's precisely because we need to understand how to win. We need to win. For winning, we need capacity. For capacity, we need development. For development, we need the focus. And for the focus, we need, you know, again, it's a circular process. And when organizations don't take the time to really, you know, invest on the people, and again, not only ideologically or technically, because I think what I see in the world is like, you know, Americans are very good at tech, you know, in general at the technical side, but the ideological side, in my view, is getting better. You know, but unions, I think, you know, we're very bad at that, and vice versa. Yeah, sometimes the ideological stuff is very strong, but the technical is not there. And the process of actually ending up with a school, I mean, to me, is very important, because that is the infrastructure we need right now. We're looking for coordinators everywhere. We're looking for women of color that can lead. We're constantly looking, and we're those people. It's just we don't end up with that infrastructure so clearly. And I do think that that's part of the challenge for parties and trade unions, is to really take the time to step back and build that muscle and remember that collective, you know, muscle that we had, and that there's also this intergenerational linkage that I think is really important. We have elders that have done this shit. We need to kind of bring them to the fold. We need to put them to work to teach. We need to be humble that we're not all, like you said, special unicorns, that in effect we can share. So I really like what you said, and I'm happy that there's such a school. And I think we need more of them, that's for sure.
So I'm aware of the time. We have about 5 more minutes. And I'm going to offer another innovation here to the panel discussion format, which is in line with my training as an organizer, which is debrief and evaluation is critical. And so what I would like to do is a final round here, just from all of you as the panelists, at least, to just, we'll do one more round. How did this panel discussion go? And did you learn something? What did you learn? How did it go? And what did you learn? And does somebody could start? Please jump on in.
I learned that Steve Hughes is an innovator of the panel technology.
The format.
This is panel 2.0.
Panel 2.0.
Well, this was an excellent and edifying and just like a very enjoyable panel. And one of the things that excites me is how quickly and seamlessly ideas, practices, particular programs are being shared across borders, both intentionally and just organically, right? And so that brings me a lot of hope, especially because I feel very clear about the critique I've heard from many comrades in places outside of the US around the very anemic internationalism of US movements. And so so that just, I think, gives me some hope that, you know, despite our best efforts to be like, to be parochial, we're still exchanging ideas. I'm looking forward to sort of leaning into that in a more intentional way.
Great. And you want to pass it to somebody? Maurice, do you want to pass to somebody?
Oh, yeah. Let's pass it to, I'll pass it to Valerie.
I wanted to listen more than anything now. No, I mean, I think for me, what's really sexy about this panel is just the kind of quality of people. I mean, it's like, if you have this kind of organizations, right, we're gonna be okay. the question is, how do we scale? And it's very interesting to understand that we're all kind of trying to develop our own power, our analysis, our ideological, strength. And I also learned a lot that, Barcelona en Común has a good quality problem. It's like the culture they got, is precisely where leaders can come from. But no, I mean, I think I've been learning a lot from the American experience, Maurice. And actually, I think there is a lot of hunger to do this kind of exchanges. And I think Fearless is one of these spaces where we get to chat with each other and understand each other, but I think the role that the American political movement lately in particular has had in a lot of us has been very, very important. And I just want to lift that. And at the same time, I think the translators, we continue to need people to be those translators and those folks that go back and forth. So, we're always looking for folks to share that in real time. And I think that's our big challenge. And, we're always asking, is there anybody from that organization that may want to come and, can we shadow you for a little while, which is another way of developing people, is maybe we send people to you to shadow some process, so we learn how to bring it back. I think that experience to me also talks to infrastructure. What do we learn from you guys? What can you learn from here? It's always kind of I think this is precisely the platform, and I'm glad that's possible. But we need to be a little bit more deliberate about these exchanges. It shouldn't just happen in this kind of whether nice, not as deep. I think we need to do more shadowing, more integration, more alignment when and if possible, also globally. So yeah.
Getting the time cue. So really quickly.
Oh,
Gabe, you want to?
I guess.
I mean, this was amazing. Kate, I was just remembering that maybe 2 years ago, we were starting to plan, okay, we should get everyone together, physically we'll all be in the same place. And then of course that became risky. But it just reminds me the kind of personal level, of course there's really interesting ideological questions and practical questions to talk about, but the idea of having person-to-person connection, just for me, especially after this past year, I kind of miss it and want that. If we can do it, if we do it online, we do it online, but in person is also nice. And love to Kate and Valerie meet at some point in real life, and Steve, Maurice and I, and again, even though we're close, Maurice, we're on the same island, right? You're right there. Right?
Let's party.
We're sweating together. Anyway, it's been an honor. I love being here.
Great.
I'll send to you, Kate.
Kate, take us out.
Yeah, love the format. And I mean, I think actually the new technologies that we have, although we're all fed up of Zoom calls and being stuck, not being able to see each other physically, I think actually they're going to be a real boost to collaboration and exchange and training for left progressive radical organizations in the future, because I think there's a sense, and that up until now it's been something, like Maurice said, that's always been not just in the US, but even organizations where you want to be doing the international work, you never have enough resources, you never have enough time. It's always something that someone's doing, into the night on the weekend because of, their activism and because they speak 3 languages or whatever, but it's not something we've been able to integrate, or, a one-off conference. It's not something we've been able to kind of integrate into our work. And I think now, once we disconnect a bit from our screens, and then kind of can come back and say, actually, now we have the tools and we have the ability after the pandemic to work online. And, we have a pending training with Working Families Party New York that we've been waiting to put on the calendar. Steve knows about this for a while. But we have to, as well as having these kind of debates, we have to be look, let's do a workshop one day, and Working Families is going to explain how they do their digital campaigns. And then, in a few months' time, let's do another in Barcelona en Común. We'll explain how our neighborhood assemblies work. And I think digital tools are really going to help that work. And so I think there's a new age of international collaboration around the corner.
Great, thank you. And we're having a very in real life problem on the digital format that somebody's kicking us out of our conference room. So I want to thank you all. This has been great. You all are amazing. And thanks to all who tuned in on the Zoom call and on the stream, and more to come.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank
Sí se
you.
puede.
Thank you, Steve.
Adiós, compañeras. Chao.
Adiós.